Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so one basic tenet that we all adhere to, and that is monotheism, that there is one God. And this basic tenet of faith is out in one prayer that we have, which I would argue is the most important prayer in Judaism, and it is called the Shema. And the Shema appears in the Torah, what Christians call the Old Testament. It appears in Deuteronomy. And I'm going to hold this up for you so that you can see. This is a copy of the Shema. And as you can see, you can hear that, this is not regular paper. This is actual a skin from a cow. This is what similar to what a Torah scroll is written on, and what the Shema is written on. And the Shema, we are instructed to say it twice a day, in the morning and again in the evening. And I'm going to very briefly just say the first line of the Shema so that you'll hear it, and I'll translate it for you so that you know what it is that I'm saying. And this is, we say it, we cover our eyes and we focus on God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. What I just said is hear, as in listen, hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Am I the only one seeing that breakout room notification?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm going to just ignore it. See what happens. This Shema is a statement of monotheistic faith. And as I said, we say it once in the morning and we say it again at night. And interestingly, if you've ever seen men wear, it's called tefillin, it's the black boxes that men will wear on their forehead while they're praying. Have you ever seen this before? Yes, no? Okay. That's called tefillin. Inside that black box are little tiny compartments. And this parchment has been cut into smaller segments and rolled up and placed in those compartments. Why? Because it says in the Shema, and I'm just going to read a little bit from here, and you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be tefillin on your head between your eyes. And
Yeah,
So
because
push it back to your rooms in just a moment.
why?
Please send us back.
Yes, yes, I am going to. There's a glitch in the system. And I apologize, folks.
That's okay.
In room 3, Tim was presenting, so we will pick up from Tim talking about the male and the female.
I will put you back in the rooms where you belong. In just a moment, it looks like everybody's back. So let's try to get you in the rooms where you belong. Just give me a excuse me, a second. Okay.
Larry, are you sending us to our rooms?
I am going to send you to your rooms.
Okay. Not because we've been bad, though.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell with you. Okay, I'm going to open all the rooms. I don't know, and we'll hopefully everybody will go to where you started, and then I'll change the speakers, the presenters.
Larry Fultz is inviting you to giant breakout room summer.
it's like we're all coming back. You have to be electable in these interesting times.
We're back.
Yay! Is this everybody? I'd hate to start. Someone still hasn't come in.
It's like everybody.
Everybody. Okay, wonderful. So I'll get right back into it. So where was I? Oh yes. So the men, and in conservative and Reform Judaism, and a little bit in Orthodoxy, sometimes the women wear this tefillin too, but it is predominantly only worn by men. And they wear the box on their head, and they wear it also on their arm, close to their heart. Why? Because it says, "And you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be tefillin between your eyes." If you've ever been to a Jewish home, you will probably have noticed that there's a little box on the front door, in the archway, in the doorway. That box contains this rolled up inside. And in Orthodox homes, you'll find it in the door of every single room you enter. Why? Because the Shema goes on to say, "Write them upon the doorposts of your home." So this is one area where we follow this very literally. We have it on the doorposts of our doors. We write it and put it on our heads and near our hearts. And like I said, I believe this to be probably the most important prayer in Judaism because of its statement of monotheism and how we follow it. Now, like I said, in Judaism, we tend to focus more on rituals. We tend to focus more on deeds. And I thought it was very fitting and timely to go over briefly the Passover Seder, because this is a huge ritual, and in fact, it's our origin story. It's the night that we become the people that we are. There is a question. I've heard that in order to be a Jew, your mother, was that correct? If so, how do individuals convert? So this is tricky. This is where you find differences between Orthodox, conservative, and Reform Judaism. In Orthodox Judaism and conservative Judaism, Judaism is transmitted through the mother. So anyone born to a Jewish woman is Jewish. Reform Judaism accepts patrilineal inheritance. So in Reform Judaism, anyone born to either a Jewish man or a Jewish woman can be considered Jewish. And in terms of converting, to convert to Judaism, you would need to go to what's called a Beit Din, which is a group of rabbis. And usually it requires a little bit of studying. It requires a few years of taking on the practices and observances, and then the process itself. So the origin story of Jews. Before there were Beit Dins, before there were rabbis, what is our story? And our story begins with Passover. And Passover is actually my favorite holiday, even though I have to tell you that in every single Jewish household, it causes a high amount of stress, blood pressure rising, lots of anxiety, because a week we don't have, it's called chametz. And chametz is like leavened bread. We don't eat bread for this 1 week. And we, being Jews, we are an anxious and meticulous people. We not only just don't eat bread, we get rid of anything having to do with bread. We transfer ownership to someone else. We remove it from our house. We clean every bit of every inch of any surface that might possibly have had bread. And we seal it up and close it off and pretend it doesn't exist. And for 1 week, we make do without. And the night of Passover itself, the entire procession is there to teach. It's there to instruct. So if any of you ever been in Passover Seder, and if you haven't, I'll warn you now, you might get there. You think you're going out, you're going to have a nice dinner, it's a nice holiday meal, hanging out with people. You will sit there for 2 hours hungry and not eat a thing before you finally get to your dinner. Because we have a whole hoopla that we have to go through. And it is called the Agadah. And we have to get through about half of this book before you get to eat. Now, this book is based on the structure of the Passover Seder. And it goes through the process of what we say and what we do, and it retells the story. And there are two critical pieces that I want to highlight from the Seder. One of them is called the 4 questions. And it's customary in most households, the youngest child sings these 4 questions. And they translate to, why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights, we eat bread or matzah. On this night, we only eat matzah. Why on other nights do we dip only once? On this night, we dip twice. And it goes on for 4 questions. And the entire purpose of those questions, and the entire purpose really of the whole Seder, is to transmit our story to the next generation. Because for those of you who have read the Bible, you'll know that Passover, as it's described in the Bible, is nothing like what it is today, just like most Jewish holidays. Groups, collectives of people, about 30 people, let's say, would get together and purchase a lamb. They'd go to the temple. They would slaughter the lamb. The priests, would slaughter the lamb. They'd sprinkle the blood. And then the group that purchased that lamb would sit together and have a nice barbecue, and they'd call it a night. That was Passover. And for 1 week, you don't eat bread. Okay. But we don't have a temple anymore. So what do we do? Well, around the time that the temple was destroyed, that's when Judaism was completely revolutionized. And that's when the rabbis kind of recreated all of our customs and rituals. And one of the things they created was the Passover Seder. And they modeled it after Romans, which is very interesting if you think about it. So I'll get at that point in a second. The entire night of Passover, its whole entire purpose is to tell our story, to remember our story, to such an extent that the Shema, again, statement of faith, a fundamental statement of monotheism, the final words in the Shema say, Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim lachem le'Elohim. Final words, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be a God to you. We are instructed to recite the Shema twice a day, not just as a reminder of monotheism and a statement that we believe in God, but we are instructed to remember that God took us out of Egypt. So in the question here about whether Passover occurs the same time or same month each year. So according to the Jewish calendar, yes, it always occurs in the month of Nisan. Whether that falls in April or March might vary a little bit. The Jewish calendar is, interestingly enough, it's not exclusively a lunar calendar like many people think. If it were a lunar calendar, the holidays would change all the time. Like in Islam, it's a lunar calendar. Ramadan can happen any time of the year. Our calendar is a combination of solar and lunar, so our holidays always fall generally around the same time. Now, Passover Seder, the entire night is inherently contradiction. We're celebrating our freedom and we're remembering our slavery. We are overjoyed at redemption and we have to recall servitude. And the entire night is a tension. We sit on pillows and we're instructed to recline. In fact, it says in the Agadah at certain points we recline, because at the time the Agadah was written, who was in power? How do Romans eat? They're laying on those chases, right? And they're lying down. So this was the mindset of what is freedom, is to be like that. So we're instructed to be like that. At the same time, we eat matzah, which is bread of affliction, and we're recalling our servitude. So I'd like to take you through a couple of the items on the Seder plate, just to give you a little bit of an idea. So if we can't have bread, Jewish holiday, let me start before. The first thing we eat is called Karpas. And Karpas is right here. This is a radish. In some households, I grew up using parsley. Some households use celery. Some households use a potato. And you dip it in salt water. The salt water represents are tears. This is a reminder of the servitude. It's a reminder of the hardship. Why? Why this little vegetable? Interesting fact, because that's how the Romans ate. They would have vegetables as hors d'oeuvres. And so our rabbis who are modeling a Seder after what they understand freedom to be, we also have these as hors d'oeuvres. After we dip that, we make something over wine. In every Jewish holiday, we have a cup of wine right here, and we make a special blessing over wine. Now, the reason that Passover is so wonderful, after all of the stress and anxiety of cleaning out the chametz, is because on Passover, we don't just say a blessing over the wine and then have the meal. On Passover, we drink 4 cups of wine, and it's the best. One of my favorite holidays. So we have 4 cups of wine throughout this meal, and we get through the first 2, and then we have the meal, and then we have the last 2. Now, every Jewish holiday, in addition to the blessing over the wine, we have a blessing over bread, and we usually serve 2 loaves of bread, because if you recall, when we, and for every holiday, not Passover, in the desert, when we were wandering around, Hashem provided, I refer to God as, so forgive me if I God gave us what in Hebrew we call man, in English it's called manna from heaven, right? And on Friday, he would give us 2 to prepare for Shabbat. So for every Jewish holiday, we always have 2 loaves of bread. But it's Passover and we can't have bread. So what do? We have matzah. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the matzah that you've seen in stores. Usually the machine-made matzah is that square shape, and it's like a cracker. They didn't have that thousands of years ago. That didn't even exist. That's an industrial innovation. Women would make matzah from scratch. And if you've ever made bread, you know that for the gluten if it's not worked, that's when the bread starts to rise. So what we need to do, if we don't want the bread to rise, we want unleavened bread, is to constantly work that dough. So you end up with this. This is homemade matzah. And this is exactly like they would have had way back then. It's not a cracker, it's not square shape. And you can see it's kind of flexible. It's almost like pita bread, but not thick enough to open up and put something in it. And my husband and I, we have our own tradition of making our matzah each year. So it's a special treat to share with you. And we make our blessing on matzah. Now, I see that there's a question about wine. There is no particular type of wine that's needed. Some families, whether the children have wine also, it's an individual family decision. In my house, we actually don't have wine. We use grape juice. It's also acceptable. It really just depends on the family. So this matzah is what we make the blessing of the bread over. And then we have our Seder. And our Seder consists of many different items that represent different things in the story. Now, I already mentioned the salt water that we dip the vegetables in. We also have a shank bone. This shank bone is an actual shank bone from a lamb that we have on our Seder plate, and we're instructed to roast it. Now, I don't know if you can see clearly to see that is what I have done. This is a roasted shank bone that is on our Seder plate, and this is, of course, to remind us of what's called a korban, of the sacrifice that bring to the temple. And since we cannot do that, this is kind of in memory of. We also have what's called maror, and maror means bitter herbs. Now, in some families, they use horseradish. In other families, they use romaine lettuce because the bottom part of the romaine is somewhat bitter. And we dip this in the salt water. obviously this is to remind us of our servitude and the hardship of slavery. But we also dip it in what's called Haroset. And Haroset is made up of nuts and apples and wine or grape juice and honey, and it's sweet tasting. And it is supposed to symbolize the mortar that was used to hold the bricks together. In many families, Jewish families from Europe, they make like a mushy, almost paste-like Haroset. Sephardi families, these are Jews from Spain and North Africa and Turkey, they make this kind of Haroset. Last time I did this, I spilled it all over my computer, so I'm trying to be really careful. Ours is made up of walnuts, dates, apples, honey, and grape juice. And you can see it's not a mush. We keep it, it's diced, but not diced too fine. So we keep it nice and thick. And it's super yummy. And we dip the maror, the bitter herb, in here. Again, that tension, that constant tension between freedom and slavery, sweet and sour. The other thing that appears on our Seder plate, or excuse me, it's not on our Seder plate, but it's part of our Seder. If you see the silver goblet that I have right here, this is a cup for Elijah. And it's said that on Passover, Elijah comes to our homes and he will drink of our wine. So we leave a cup overnight for Elijah to come and drink. There is a somewhat new innovation that you will find predominantly among Reform and Conservative Jews, although a few Orthodox Jews do it as well. And this is simply to have a glass of water on the table as well. And this is called Miriam's cup. And this is in honor of Miriam, Moses' sister, who was also a prophet. And Miriam, it is said that when we were slaves in Egypt wandering in the desert, there was a well that followed her. And when she died, the well dried up. And so in honor and in memory of Miriam, some families leave. You can see I have here a glass of water behind Elijah's cup, a glass of water in honor of Miriam. And that is basically the structure of the Seder. Before we begin eating, it is customary, and it's in the Agadah, that we go and we open the door and we offer a general call, let all who are hungry come and eat. And it's very interesting because this statement in the Agadah, this statement is I won't read it because but it's actually not in Hebrew, it's Aramaic. And what's very interesting about that is, again, this was written during the time of the Roman conquest. The language of the time was Aramaic. So this statement that we say is purposely said in Aramaic so that people could hear it and understand it and know that they are welcome to participate in the Seder meal. This is our origin story. This is who and how we became a people. Another part of the Seder that I'd like to point out, it's my personal favorite part of the Seder, is when we go through the 10 plagues, which I'm happy to talk about. I have a whole presentation on that too. But when we list the 10 plagues, blood, frogs, hail, all of it, we dip our finger into our cup of wine and we put a drop on our plate. And we do this for each plague. And we're instructed not to do that. We're instructed to our hand. And the idea is that even in the midst of our celebration, even in the midst of our joy and redemption, we should not forget that there were those who suffered in the course of our obtaining our freedom. And we should not take even a small bit of pleasure in their suffering, even though it led to our own redemption. And this is the story of my people and how we came to be. I am more than happy to answer any questions you might have about this or anything.
Carolyn, I have a question. So you're saying that the origins began with the Exodus, but would you not trace it back to Prophet Abraham?
question. I did this in the first group and I forgot to do it with this one. So yes, absolutely. Our origin is with Abraham. We call him Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father. He is the first monotheist who discovered, the singularity of God, if you will, and passed it on. And with his wife Sarah, they passed it on to their son, with his wife and his son, and so on and so forth. But we were essentially a family. It was essentially a family. And so this story of Meretz Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, is the story of our becoming a nation. Because it's while we're in Egypt, if you remember the family, there's a famine, and we go down to Egypt and we sojourn there. And in the course of sojourning there, we became a great population and we multiplied, right? And that's when we were perceived that we might be a threat, and that's when we were enslaved. And so it is at that time that it stopped being, a family thing, I guess, and it grew into a nation as we are now. Now, interestingly, while we were slaves in Egypt, it said that certain customs we maintained. We kept our own clothes and we kept our unique language. That is what they say. It says, I have a question here, that Jesus spoke the Aramaic language also, and that he was a Jew or Hebrew. Is that correct? So this is complicated. The language spoken would have been Aramaic, yes. And here's where it gets kind of complicated. So since Judaism is passed through the mother, if his mother was Jewish, then yes, he's considered a Jew. And that is why Jesus is referred to as a Jew. If you've seen those my savior is a Jewish carpenter, or one of those bumper stickers. So yes, he is considered Jewish, which is interesting. And many would argue that he was trying to reform Judaism at the time, is something I've heard. But
we have about 30 seconds left.
I have 30 seconds left. Does anybody have any other questions? Thank you all. This was so much fun, and I really appreciate getting the opportunity to share this with you. Thank you, Judy, for recording.
You're so welcome.
Shalom.
Shalom. How are you? So thank you again. I appreciate it. And we have, he's going to move us, so I won't share the final thing.